Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're stepping back, way back, actually, over a century.
We are. We're going to explore some really foundational thinking on, that crucial link between psychology and how we educate.
And the source for this.
It's an article from, believe it or not, 1910. It's called The Contribution of Psychology to Education, written by Edward L. Thorndike, published in the Journal of Educational Psychology.
1910. Wow. And Thorndike was a major figure, a real pioneer in, well, both psychology and education back then.
Absolutely. And in this piece, he's tackling a really fundamental question.
Which is?
Basically, how can the science of psychology, the study of the mind, actually help make education better? How can it improve what we do in schools?
Okay, and he had a specific framework for thinking about this, right?
He did, yeah. He broke it down into 4 key areas where he thought psychology really contributes: the aims of education, the materials, the means, and the methods.
Aims, materials, means, methods. Got it. Provides a nice roadmap for us.
Exactly. It helps structure his argument.
All right, let's start with the aims then. What did Thorndike say about how psychology helps us define our goals in education?
Well, his main point was about clarity. He argued that psychology helps us get really specific about what we're trying to achieve.
How so?
We often use these, big kind of abstract terms like culture or discipline or efficiency. Thorndike said psychology pushes us to define those aims in terms of actual observable changes in students.
So not just saying we want culture, but spelling out the specific thinking skills or behaviors that represent culture in a person.
Precisely. It forces you to ask, what change are we really trying to make here? Which isn't always easy to answer.
Makes sense. It makes aims less fuzzy.
Did he mention anything about aims that might be impossible to achieve?
Did, yeah. It was quite insightful for the time. He brought up this idea, which some people apparently held, that things learned by one generation could be sort of biologically passed down to the next through education.
Inherited knowledge, almost.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. Improving the stock through schooling. Thorndike, looking at the early science of heredity, basically said, look, if mental and moral traits acquired through education aren't actually inherited biologically, then aiming for that kind of direct generational improvement is probably, pointless.
Right. Our aims need to be grounded in what's scientifically plausible.
Exactly. And he also pointed out how aims themselves evolve based on psychological understanding.
Like the example of physical health.
Yeah, exactly. He noted that historically, physical well-being wasn't always seen as a primary educational goal. Sometimes it was even seen as secondary to, say, spiritual development.
Which seems strange now.
Right. But Thorndike argued that psychology, by showing that connection between the mind and the body, especially the nervous system, was key in making us realize that physical health is a vital educational aim.
Okay, so psychology clarifies aims, grounds them in reality, and even helps reshape them. What about the second area, the material of education?
For Thorndike, the material was the students themselves, their minds, their characters, their behaviors, and he saw psychology as the main science for understanding this material.
He used an analogy, didn't he?
He did, a good one. He compared education needing psychology and physiology to how agriculture relies on chemistry and botany.
Okay.
You can't grow crops well without understanding soil and plants. Likewise, you can't educate effectively without understanding human nature, the learners.
Makes perfect sense.
He even talked about this vision of a complete science of psychology that could eventually predict exactly how any educational action would affect any student.
Ambitious.
Very. But his point was that the deeper our psychological understanding, the better equipped we are to teach. You can almost see the beginnings of ideas like personalized learning there.
That's a great connection.
Okay.
So aims, materials. What about the means of education?
He touched on 2 main things here. First, the influence of people, parents, teachers, friends. Hugely important means.
Yeah.
And second, the tools, books, maps, equipment. But he stressed that these tools are only useful when you understand how they interact with human nature, with the learner's mind.
Right, the tool itself isn't enough. You need to know how people learn from it.
Exactly.
Okay, finally, the methods of teaching. This seems like a really direct application. How did psychology help here, according to Thorndike?
He saw 3 main ways. First, you can deduce teaching methods directly from psychological laws.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, he used fraction division. He said kids often struggle because they've learned from whole numbers that division makes things smaller. That's a psychological habit.
Right, interference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So knowing that helps you devise a method to specifically address that interference.
Clever. What's the second way?
Second, even when methods are found through trial and error, psychology can explain why they work.
Okay.
Like people generally agree smaller classes are better, or a good home life helps character development.
Yeah.
Psychology digs into the underlying reasons, which can lead to refining those methods.
Understanding the why behind the what.
You got it. And the third way,
Yes.
testing and verification.
Yeah.
Psychology provides the tools, the measurement techniques, to actually test if one teaching method is truly better than another.
Like A/B testing for teaching.
Sort of, yeah. Use an example about teaching spelling. You could use psychological measurement to see which approach yielded better results, objectively, moving beyond just opinion.
Bringing scientific rigor. Okay. He also mentioned specific areas of psychological research that were particularly important for education at the time.
He did. One big one was measuring mental functions, attention, memory, that kind of thing. He compared it to developing thermometers in physical science.
You need the tools to measure progress.
Absolutely. If you can't measure learning effectively, how do you know if a method works or if one school is better than another?
Good point. What else?
The study of individual differences, how people vary based on age, sex, background, individual traits. Understanding this variation is obviously crucial for tailoring education.
Knowing your audience, essentially.
Right. And also research into how different mental abilities relate to each other. Like, is good imagery related to good reasoning? Trying to understand mental types?
And the age-old nature versus nurture question.
Definitely. He stressed how vital it was for education to understand the roles of heredity and environment in shaping kids' minds and morals. They were just starting to grapple with the mechanisms of inheritance back then.
Fascinating to see these questions being framed over 100 years ago. He also touched on instincts, right?
Yes, studying innate human tendencies and how education can modify them. And dynamic psychology, how instincts and capacities actually develop into habits and skills through practice, reinforcement, inhibition. All concepts still central to learning theory.
It's amazing how much groundwork was being laid. And didn't he also flip it around saying education helps psychology too?
He did. That was quite forward-thinking. He called the classroom a vast laboratory for psychology.
How so?
He said, for instance, that analyzing kids' mistakes in math can give psychologists real insights into basic cognitive processes like association or analysis.
So practical educational problems fuel pure psychological research.
Exactly. He saw it as a two-way street.
So wrapping this up, Thorndike's 1910 article really establishes this fundamental idea. You can't really think seriously about education without seriously engaging with the science of psychology.
Absolutely. It lays that groundwork. Aims, materials, means, methods, psychology informs them all.
And it's striking how relevant those core ideas still feel today, even with all the advancements since 1910.
It really is. The need for clear aims, understanding the learner, scientifically evaluating methods, that's all still incredibly pertinent.
It really makes you wonder, though, what new features or aims for education might our current understanding of psychology and neuroscience suggest? Something Thorndike couldn't have foreseen.
That's a great question to ponder. What does today's psychology tell us about the aims we should be setting now? Definitely food for thought.
Indeed. Thanks for unpacking that piece with me.
My pleasure. Fascinating stuff.